It is an illustration, I think, of the assault we are seeing on freedom of speech. And it is just the beginning.
I'm now going to ask Gunnar Beck to say a few words. Gunnar, until recently, was a member of the European Parliament. He is also a member of the AfD, and he is a person of some worth. Gunnar.
Well, thank you very much, Gregory. Thank you for your kind words. It reminds me, together with the previous address we've just heard and been delighted by, how that there is a world outside the European Parliament and how good it is in many respects to be back. Now, Gregory's kindly given me, originally 10 minutes, then he kindly slightly increased it and then reduced it. So the idea was that I say a few things about Germany's inexorable decline, but I've decided not to, because anything I'd say about it today would be good news and over-optimism by tomorrow. Right? You can read about it in the papers. Things are moving from bad to worse, almost day by day. And it's a good reminder, I think. I mean, I remember when I was at university studying politics, amongst other things, here in this country, there was always the example of Italy. Italy was a country that couldn't hold on to one government, that had about 2 or 3 governments every day, and yet the economic situation wasn't catastrophic. But over time, the successive 3 decades have taught us you cannot have a completely dysfunctional political system and pursue utterly responsible policies and yet expect things to turn out all right. And I think what's currently happening in Germany is a stark reminder of this. You cannot go against the laws of economics and nature, promote mass migration, and try to save the world and resolve the world's migration crisis all by yourself when you account for roughly 1.5% of the world's CO2 emissions, maybe 2.5% of the world's GDP, and have about 80 million people, which wouldn't allow you to accommodate the 1.5 billion that are supposed to be moving. Now, what I've decided to talk about instead are some worrying developments concerning freedom of speech in both Germany and in the EU. I'll give you 2 examples. In April and July, the higher regional court in the East German town of Halle handed down 2 remarkable judgments against the prominent AfD politician Björn Höcke, by which he was sentenced respectively to criminal penalties of 13,000 and 17,000 euros for essentially the same offence. Höcke had ended 2 of his speeches with the words, "Everything for my country, everything for Germany." And that was the reason for his conviction. He was convicted for the sole reason that this was a slogan used by the Nazi stormtroopers in the 1930s, which was prohibited. Höcke's lawyers had provided copious evidence that the phrase, although used during the Third Reich, had been commonly used in public and parliamentary addresses during the Wilhelmine period. It had been invoked even by Social Democrats at that time, before the First World War. It continued to be used during the Weimar Republic by politicians from the entire political spectrum, even the communists. Admittedly, it was then, it didn't fall completely out of fashion during the 12 years that followed, but importantly, it continued to be used in both the Federal Republic and in the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, where at least two very prominent East German communist politicians, Wilhelm Pieck and Otto Grotewohl, repeatedly used it in their speeches. So did Höcke, simply because it had become part of the German language. And he was convicted for it, sentenced to about 35,000 euros in fines now, solely because what had by then been a part and parcel of the German language, if you wanted to stir up a bit of emotion, was also used during the Nazi period. To make it even more ridiculous, the last very public occasion where that phrase was used in Germany, apart from Höcke's not all that public meetings, was in 1990 when the then German football coach Franz Beckenbauer sent his players onto the pitch in the final against Argentina. I said, you must give everything for Germany, everything for Germany. Well, on two of the probably hundreds of thousands of occasions where that phrase was used in Germany, and publicly so, well, Höcke's are the only ones where he was actually sentenced for a criminal offence. Now, the ostensible legal basis for Höcke's conviction is Article 68A of the German Penal Code, which prohibits the use of characteristic symbols of the Nazi period, without being very specific about the meaning of the word symbols. Nor does it say anything about the word characteristic here. Now, according to a decision of an obscure higher regional court in the town of Hamm, I'm sure most people present here would have never heard of the town of Hamm. In 2008, the three words, alles für Deutschland, everything for Germany, are such a symbol. Höcke is not a lawyer. Most lawyers, I'm one myself, even today, never heard, until very recently, never heard of that judgment. Nonetheless, not knowing that this was a criminal phrase, having no reason to know that it was a criminally prohibited phrase, and there being no reasonable grounds for anyone who's not a lawyer and a specialist in this particular type of law to know that, he was convicted. Although the slogan was well established in the German language for centuries, just because it happened to be used also during the Third Reich, after all the Nazi leaders did speak the same language, it's unavoidable to use, not to fall back onto some of the established words and similes. You see, that was reason enough to sentence him. Worse, he's used that phrase on several occasions, altogether 5 times, before it was judicially established that he was criminal. So there are 3 trials in store for him. So it'd be from 13,000 to 17,000, next time it'd be about 25,000, then it'd be a suspended sentence, and eventually he'll be incarcerated. Right? This is totally absurd, but it is an illustration, I think, of the assault we are seeing on freedom of speech. And it is just the beginning. Freedom of speech has traditionally always been restricted on the grounds of defamation, by the criminal law, especially incitement or threats to violence, and more recently by human rights provisions to prevent what's now commonly called hate speech or racial discrimination. For the EU under the German politician von der Leyen, however, the traditional restrictions do not go far enough. 2 years ago, the EU adopted the so-called Digital Services Act, which imposes duties on all large social media providers and platforms, as well as search engines, duties to monitor all content by its users for so-called hate speech, illegal content, and worse, all forms of discrimination. The Act provides that the providers must remove undesirable content and report the offenders. In the case of non-compliance by the internet providers, the Commission is free to impose multi-billion fines on providers. This may happen very soon for the first time involving, or in a case involving Twitter. The Commission has already opened an investigation. Now, the list of offensive speech or content is not closed, and it can be extended to other forms of content by simply legislative amendment or judicial interpretation. Now, moreover, member states in the European Union are encouraged to toughen up criminal legislation on hate speech and disinformation. Everywhere in Europe, we've heard that again and again this morning and this afternoon, dissatisfaction with the EU's disastrous policies in the field of migration and climate change, COVID, crime, is on the rise. That's why the Commission is so concerned about free speech and why it's so eager to restrict it. Restricting free speech on the internet is indeed the key. The Digital Services Act 2022 is designed to expunge most fundamental criticism on the web. And it will not be done by faceless little government bureaucrats like Winston Smith in 1984, but by big business itself on behalf of government. Now, this outsourcing of repression and censorship is a major feature of the illiberalism of our time. It's happening at all times, and it has been happening for quite a while. More and more areas of politics and lawmaking are subject to judicial review by courts. Migration, for example, we are told, is effectively impossible to control because of human rights as enforced by the courts, which prevent anything worth doing that will prevent migrants from coming ashore, and then it would prevent most things that we could conceive of doing to deport them. Economic policy has effectively been transferred to central bankers. Health policy, we are told, has to be partly transferred to the WHO because of the ever-present danger of pandemics. Military policy has long been a exclusive matter for NATO, and our foreign policy is effectively made elsewhere and has been for quite a while. Governments in all these cases can simply say, it's not our fault what you don't like. It's the courts, the banks, NATO, or simply the need for international cooperation. It all leaves us no choice. These are at fault. We, the governments, are simply like tortoises on our backs. We can't move even 1 inch. That's what we effectively hear all the time. The transfer of the enforcement of government or EU censorship to business is a further stage in this outsourcing of formally democratic decision-making to non-state actors. It makes business the censor, informer, and collaborator of an unelected and unaccountable organization, the EU. Now, the UK Online Safety Act 2023 does not quite go as far as the Digital Services Act, but the current UK government, I've read repeatedly, is already discussing bringing UK law into line with EU law. The assault on free speech, I'm afraid, has only just begun. Thank you very much for listening.
Is that okay with you?